Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is the Person You Want to Be podcast. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, I am honored to have with me heart-centered writer, thinker, and human being, Don Johnson. Don graduated from college and lived as a monk in an ashram for 10 years before a 30-year career in the performance improvement industry as a leadership consultant and vice president of sales. He is a top writer on medium.com and has recently written a book entitled Be More Conscious, a guide for living, learning, and loving. He lives with his wife in a seacoast village in Northeast Scotland. Don Johnson, welcome to the Person You Want to Be.
Eric, thank you. Happy to be here with you.
I'm thrilled to have you on here. Do people call you Dojo? Do you go by Dojo?
Some people do. Some people do, yes.
I think that's in a way hilariously appropriate. A dojo, for those not in the know, is essentially a space in which martial arts are practiced. Now you go to practice a particular martial art, and you have a chapter in your book that deals with what you call verbal aikido. Can you explain for us, first of all, what aikido is, and then what you mean by verbal aikido?
Yeah, sure. So aikido is a martial art form whereby there's no offensive or defensive maneuvers. The idea is that the receiver is able to basically neutralize the opponent without doing any of those maneuvers, using the attacker's energy in a sense to neutralize that attack. So when it comes to verbal aikido is a way of handling an incoming verbal attack and using that attack and not reacting to it in an aggressive way, nor reacting to it in a passive way. And, if you want, I could give you an example, but that's the concept of Aikido.
I love it. To me, it just sounds like a Jedi mind trick. But sure, why not give us an illustration if you could, just so we get a sense of it?
Yeah, I think, I think an example might be something like, you might say to me, hey, Don, the project you're working on is really stupid. And verbal aikido, the verbal aikido response would be, okay, so Eric, I understand. So you think that the project that I'm working on is stupid. You say, so what I'm doing there is I'm helping you, first of all, own what you just said. So you think it's stupid. So Eric, so you think it's stupid? Yeah. So before I, explain to you why I'm working on it this way, I'd love to hear your view and opinion, if you're open to hearing mine. So tell me, why do you think that? Blah, blah, blah. You explain, your thinking. I said, okay, great. Here's my perspective on it. And I explain myself. So therefore, what's happening there is I'm not countering with, no, it's not stupid, or you're stupid for even criticizing me. So I'm not getting into that. I'm not buying into that piece. I'm using inquiry. I'm taking a breath to gather my own thoughts because I've just been attacked and, that kind of thing. So that's the theory behind it. And the practice of it is just like I said, it can be a super valuable technique to handle something that is, abusive or a toxic opinion or a criticism or whatever it may be.
I love this because, especially in this day and age, this seems like a very useful, practical skill to employ. I love that you're diffusing the hostility that is essentially like, being presented to you rather than escalating it. You're not being defensive, and you're basically calming things down and starting a conversation. But the way you put it, you need, it takes two to tango, whether it's a fight or whether it's a civilized conversation. And so you're making the other person not only own their statement, but you're essentially, you said a phrase, something like, if you're open to it. So you're making sure that there is room for it, right? Because if the other person just has no interest in, right?
Yeah, and it takes only one person to stop an argument. And yeah, you're right. It's a technique to help not pour more fuel on the fire.
So this would be like if we were to do a daytime talk show using this method, it would die in the ratings, right? It's the antithesis of daytime talk shows that thrive on conflict and drama.
It would be dull and boring. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't work. It would crash in the ratings. Yeah.
There are so many wonderful chapters in your book. I wanted to, first of all, just congratulate you on having completed it. I know that you're in the process of shopping it around at the moment. It's a beautiful book. I love how heart-centered it is. It's a very inspirational read, and it's the kind of read that is the fact that it's divided up into these chapters. They serve as self-contained kind of vignettes in and of themselves. And so you can read a few of them, but I suspect that readers, once they start, it's going to be hard to put down because you have a very engaging style of writing, a wonderful way of integrating both things you've learned about good communication, which obviously is, was a huge part of your career, these skills that you've learned and that you teach, but the style of the writing is so far from, I am the almighty teacher from above bestowing my wisdom upon you, dear reader. It's not that at all. You come across, you present yourself as a human being, as you refer to yourself and all human beings, flawed and fabulous. I love the openness with which you write about your personal experiences and the things that you share. You make yourself vulnerable, you make yourself human, and that immediately gives you credibility to me reading it. There's so many great insights, even and just so many wonderful thought-provoking ideas. So I just want to encourage people. This is so worth reading once you can get your hands on it. Be more conscious. So for the purpose of our conversation, the podcast is called The Person You Want to Be. And I want to start by asking your earliest, if you could give us paint a picture of your childhood, kind of where you grew up and what the context, what it looked like, and your earliest memory of thinking about the person you wanted to be when you were a kid.
Great question. Yeah, so I grew up. My father was in the military. I was born in '51, and he was a lieutenant in the Air Force. I was born in an Army hospital in outside of Denver, Colorado, and so and then he left the military and started working for a pharmaceutical company on the East Coast. So, I grew up. I grew up in New York, New Jersey, Long Island, Boston, back to New Jersey. And, my childhood was living in suburbia, living in a middle-class environment. And as I grew into high school, the person that I wanted to be was clearly not what I saw around me a lot of the time. And what I mean is there was a poignant moment, and it's in one of the stories in the book. When I was in high school, my father was driving me to school one day, which didn't always happen, but it was one of those days. And we're passing by the train station in Ridgewood, New Jersey, bedroom community to New York. Lots of commuters hopping on the train. You get to New York in, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes. And that was a moment when we drove by that station that one day, and I saw 20, 30, 40 men only, with briefcases, with overcoats. Basically, they all looked the same, heading into New York. Something in me said, that's not what I want to be. And I didn't have the answer what I did want to be at that moment. But something hit me then. I said, I don't want to just live that kind of very predictable, I look like everybody else, cookie cutter houses, live in suburbia. That's what struck me at that moment in time. And maybe that was the jumping off point to just rebelling and trying to find my own way, trying to find my own identity, trying to find my own gift, my own uniqueness. And that was, a journey that took a long time to find some of those answers.
Yeah, I love that. So your first impression of what you wanted to be was what you knew you didn't want to be. But as a kid, though, younger than it, I mean, even like as a younger child, did you have any particular fantasies of, imagining like what you wanted to be when you grew up? I don't know. Were there any, however, impractical? I mean, you're a kid, right? So,
yeah. I was surrounded by a lot of creativity in the house. My mother was an artist. She was a jazz ragtime piano player. She was very creative, did all kinds of things when we were kids. So there was a lot of music in the house. There was a lot of reading, that kind of thing. I do remember when I was a kid, probably 12, 13, maybe the Beatles had just come out at that time. Bob Dylan, I can almost remember him. Like a Rolling Stone on the radio. I'm sitting there, and I do remember, I believe there was just this little voice in my head that said, you know what, it would be really cool if I could make a living just doing something that just came out of me. And I don't know what that was at that time. Maybe it was writing, maybe it was music, but I didn't really discover any musical talent within me until much later. And I didn't really dream about being a musician. If anything, probably was leaning into a dream of writing. And I did go on to do bits and pieces of writing along the way. Nothing serious, but it was there, buried in there, I think.
I'm not surprised because, you clearly have a gift for it, your ability to grab the reader. And again, I'm so impressed. I love the format of the book because at first, when you begin reading it, it feels a little disjointed. And I do understand that a lot of the book came from articles that you had written and they were intended as self-contained pieces. So when you first start reading it, you're like, oh, okay, he's kind of jumping around. Like this article is about good communication skills. This one is a personal story about, taken from his life. And by the way, I mean, they're all great. You have lived such a fascinating life, and there's so many dimensions to it and elements to it. So it's a joy to read. You mentioned your mother as an influence, and there's a chapter that you devote exclusively to her. I was very touched by it. It's a beautiful recollection and tribute. So you had these influences of, creativity was alive and well in your home, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. And you talked about the inspiration of experiencing the Beatles and Dylan when they first arrived on the scene. But interestingly, it didn't necessarily make you go, that's what I want to do specifically, but it did. I love the way you put it. It gave you the sense of, wouldn't it be great to make a living doing something that just poured out of me, something to that effect, right? Beautiful. So you didn't have like a specific dream, although you do mention that writing, had a place in your heart and your mind from an early age. Maybe it didn't develop as quickly, but it doesn't surprise me at all because you have the spirit of a writer. And in fact, I was wondering if you had done, this book was written, if, as far as I understand, completely post the COVID pandemic. Is that right? Like since the start of the pandemic, or had you started it before then?
No, it started right around March 2020. So it was basically 2 years of writing. Yeah.
And prior to that, did you do any more formal writing in any, I mean, I know you did some songwriting, we'll get into that, but did you have any particular outlets for writing prior to that in these?
Around 2010, I did some very businessy communication blogging on WordPress, a bit there. When I worked for a consulting company prior to that, I wrote and published 1 or 2 articles. But they weren't, I don't think they were anything like what you find in the book. They were a little more formal.
Yeah. It's, there are legions of stories out there of writers who didn't come into their own until their later years. And these are some of our most like well-known and beloved writers. And I think there might be something to that in the sense that like your book couldn't have been written without you having lived it first, without you having, done all of these things, had all these experiences, undergone all of this growth. So, and I can identify with that. I created a course recently, and it literally could not have been created had I not had the life experience first that inspired the content. So that is, but that said, you also do have a gift just for the written word, I think, in your ability to draw people in. So, it's something I really admire and respect about you.
Listen, thanks. I mean, those are really kind and flattering words for sure. But I'm glad to hear them, because that my intent was in writing was to be, honest and self-deprecating, and to try to tell the truth about my journey and what I learned and where I did well and where I didn't do so well. And I'm glad that comes across, because when I started writing on Medium, I read some authors that were pretty darn good at that. And I was influenced by other writers too along the way prior to that, who I read and I said, wow, and I'll tell you a story about one of them in a moment, but there were a few that really struck me. And I was like, you know what, if I wrote something, I'd want to write like that, which was to keep it very vulnerable and very self-revealing and very honest. That's what appealed to me.
Well, you definitely do that. And I think that it's not something that necessarily comes easily to even really talented and competent and able writers, because there's a certain amount of courage in revealing things about yourself that are less than pretty. And that's apart from writing ability and skill, is just the willingness. And that's why I introduced you as a heart-centered and heartful writer, because it really comes across that you are writing from the heart and you're willing to look at yourself, even the less than flattering aspects of yourself, and you just make yourself highly relatable and real. So, and you talk about in the book, you talk about your 4 core values. You mentioned honesty just now, and the other ones that you list are responsibility, and you can put a hyphen in between those, response and ability, integrity, honesty, and humility. Talk about those values, but also I'm interested in how long did it take you to arrive at those values, and was there a revision process over the years in honing those and distilling them down to those 4?
Those values started to come to me in around 2007 or 8. And that was because I was working for a consulting company that was founded by 2 Argentine young men, Fred Kaufman, who's the author of Conscious Business, a remarkable piece of work, and another guy, Andy Frere. And Fred had put together some content that was cobbled together from all kinds of great thinkers: Peter Senge, Donald Schoen, Chris Argyris, Fernando Flores, Ken Wilber, Don Beck, just the list goes on and on. But when I was working for that company, we taught a lot of those principles. We taught and worked with executives around how they could be a stronger leader when they were in touch with who they really were on the inside, and also becoming more clear about what their values were. So those things started to sort of arise for me then. And, I refined them a bit over the years. And as I started writing it over, before the 2020, I had those values kind of nestled in my head. And I would use them as examples in workshops. And I also found, frankly, that when I really reflected on my life, I said, I really saw the power of them as I put them into practice myself, and knew that they served me well. They kept me in touch with my heart, is really what they did.
All right. So let's go back. This is a vivid memory of seeing the businessmen in the suits with the suitcases boarding the train and having this visceral reaction of anything but that. It's really funny because I know from personal experience that you have to be careful to never say never about really anything, because the moment you do that, you're practically like inviting the universe to create that for you, right? The more the more vehemently you say, I'll never be like my dad, I'll never, whatever it is, you're just asking the universe to make it so. but you didn't obviously go into that. You didn't take that path directly. So what happened when it came, as you finished high school? I know you went to college. Tell us a little bit about the decision about college and what your experience was like there, what you majored in, where you went, and what your mindset was at that stage of your life about, the person you wanted to be.
Yeah. Before I say that, the funny thing is, I did become that person standing at the train. And I know I know that because I put it in one of the articles. That was the irony of the whole thing. But to your point, my mindset, my mindset leaving college was, boy, am I happy to be out of the house, and let me find myself where I can do whatever I want. I need the freedom, and that's to me. That to me was the kind of the underlying principle in going to college. And also, frankly, if I didn't go to college, I would have been drafted and I could have wound up in Vietnam. So there was also a burning thing in there of, it'd probably be a good idea to stay in school.
That's a huge incentive.
I didn't, and I knew people that went, and I knew people that didn't come back. And I had a lot of emotion around that whole situation. I feel very, as well as many other people, blessed and lucky to have not had to do that. So I went to college, and as those years went on, I studied English literature. I had no idea what I was doing in college, Eric. Honest to God, when I my parents dropped me off, I was totally clueless. I had no North Star, no target. It was to explore and to try to find my way. And so I studied English literature. I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of writing, studied a lot of poetry, did some creative writing. I got a D in my creative writing class. I had a big falling out with the teacher. It was a terrible experience. And I continued to dabble in it, but I barely passed the class. But I continued on, and what I did was, to pull up my grades, I took sculpture classes, and this wonderful man was head of the department, and I just said, you know what, I want to work with my hands, I want to build stuff, and that's what I did. So my grades got pulled up by straight A's in sculpture classes, and
Had you had any experience with sculpture prior to that?
No, none at all. No, it was just. But the guy was such an inspiration. He just was in love with sculpture, and I began to appreciate some of the world's greatest sculptors, Henry Moore in particular, who did these giant sculptures made out of lost wax and bronze, and it was a beautiful, amazing experience to take those classes, and continue just to experiment. And so that's when my spiritual journey kind of started, just going through all kinds of mind altering experiences, and then coming up with a sense of, gosh, there's got to be more. There's got to be something that is bigger than me, that is greater than me, and I don't know where it is, but I have a feeling it's probably not out there somewhere. It's probably inside here somewhere that I need to find. So
where did you go? Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Ohio Wesleyan University, which is in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah. So it sounds like college did serve, a function in the sense that it did give you some freedom to explore, and you did have new experiences, and you were, it's funny with education. Nowadays, the cost of higher education is so prohibitive and so incredibly threatening. People that embark on it are often taking on just an incredible amount of debt in the form of student loans. So like the stakes are really high, and the freedom to just sort of explore and get to know yourself and try things out, and is all but vanquished, right? Because of the pressure associated with, so it's a luxury I also got to enjoy as a college student. And the other thing about college is you're 18 years old, and if you're going to college, pretty much all you've really experienced is school. You haven't had a whole lot of life experience generally. And so, how are you supposed to know anything, let alone like what you want to like study so that you can have a career in it? I think the best that education can do is encourage and light the fire of and spark of curiosity in people, and open them up to ideas. And I love the way you described the teacher of your sculpture classes as just being so enthusiastic. That enthusiasm is really contagious. I learned myself that, I thought that there were subjects that were empirically interesting and others that just simply weren't, no matter what, like you couldn't rescue them. They were just boring. And I discovered in college that to my surprise, that the teacher was pretty much everything, because you could, if you have the right guide and the right, who has an intrinsic love for the subject and wants to share that love with you, you might be surprised. A subject you thought might have been dry can come to life, and something you thought there's no way to ruin this can be ruined. So
true, Eric, true. And there were a couple of teachers for me that stood out. One was in high school, and I wrote about him in one article. And this guy, it's interesting, isn't it? How the people that seem to really love what they do, you remember. You remember the emotional impact that they had. And I suppose if you had somebody that was terribly cruel, you would also remember that too. However, the teachers that made an impact on me were the ones that were lit up, that loved what they do. And this guy in high school lit me up about literature. And, we were reading Moby Dick, A Separate Piece by John Knowles, something else. I don't recall what it was at this moment in time. And, that carried through to me. And then when I discovered One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in college, Ken Kesey's masterpiece, that lit me up too, about literature and about writing. And then I discovered Hermann Hesse and D.H. Lawrence, and all those were key pieces for me in terms of self-discovery and looking for more.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, you mentioned that by the end of college, you knew there was more out there, but you had this suspicion that it was that your journey was going to be more of an inward one. So tell us about, I revealed already at the beginning that you spent 10 years in an ashram. Now, in the book, this is one of the most fascinating chapters from my point of view in the book. I was absolutely, we could spend the whole show just talking about this, because was so fascinating in so many ways. But you do use the word cult as well. I think in the title of that chapter. So tell us, first of all, how this came to be, how this came to be, this 10-year journey. I'm just going to let you just take it.
Yeah. And, interrupt me along the way, please. So back to college. For 4 years, I walked by one of the main buildings on the campus, stone buildings built back in the 1800s. And on one building, a cornerstone was there, and the carving in it was, I guess it's a quote from the Bible: "Know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And I looked at that every day that I walked by it for those years. And by the third year, I was just scratching my head saying, okay, so what is this truth? And that was the question that I held. And then I met a young lady who was trying to get into Ohio Wesleyan in the summer between my junior and senior years. And she told me about this young Indian guru who was dispensing and helping people get in touch with this truth, this inner knowledge. And that was all it took, frankly. When I heard about this, I had a very, psycho-spiritual experience after I heard about this, the evening after she told me, where I had some kind of deja vu experience of, this all sounds familiar to me, like I've been down this road before, kind of a thing. I didn't know what that was. But a seed was planted in me, and I said, I need to find out more about this. Whatever it is, I want to know more. And I did. So a few months later, I don't know how I did it. I don't remember. But basically, I found an ashram in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where my parents lived. And they were followers, people that lived in this ashram. It's a Hindi word that means shelter. And they said to me, well, you're going back to Ohio Wesleyan, and there's going to be a Mahatma, a great soul, a follower of Maharaji, who was this young Indian boy. At the time, he was 16 years old. He's going to be in town. He can help you and show you these ancient techniques of meditation. I said, great. So I made my way to Columbus, listened to him speak for 2-3 nights, and then I was shown these techniques. And basically he said, you don't have to believe everything I'm telling you, that there's this inner peace. He said, go off and try it. If you like it, stick with it. If you don't leave it. So I went back home. I was a little skeptical, but I sat down to meditate over the next, couple days, weeks, and I felt something. I'm not sure what it was. It sure felt good to quiet oneself and sit in silence and focus on your breath and just kind of let yourself be. And that's how it started.
So you entered, you had this inner prompting, you followed your curiosity. Obviously, you had no way of knowing that this was going to be the next 10 years of your life. No. But you just took the next seemingly right step at that time. And you experienced, so was it the 16-year-old guru himself that you said you spent a couple evenings with that taught these practices?
One of his followers.
One of his followers.
One of his close followers.
Gotcha.
From an Indian man, an older man, one of his followers. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was your first ever experience of meditation?
Yep. Absolutely. Never.
So you went, it's certainly an appealing proposition, right? Try this, see for yourself. Don't take it from me. have the experience. If it's helpful and beneficial, great. And if not, then move on. Right. So that's, to me, that's a very good sales technique.
It worked. No,
so you tried it and you had a positive experience. So then what?
Then, then it was, okay, great. So there's this, there's this inner peace, this inner experience that sure feels good. I just noticed as the, months went on, the rest of the college year, that I started to look at the world through different eyes. And instead of looking at it through my mind and a bunch of jumbled thoughts and so on, I started to look and say, I'm looking at it from a different part of myself. I'm looking at the world from a different part of myself because I'm in touch with a different part of myself now. And that was quite noticeable. And it got my attention more and more as I did it. And I said, you know what? When I graduated in the May or June of that year, 73, I said, I'm curious about this. I really do want to know more. I want to know more about this boy guru. I mean, that's kind of unusual. Some 16-year-old kid who's being worshipped and followed by tens of thousands of people. And I'm curious about him. And I'm curious to know more about this inner world, this inner knowledge. So I said, I'm going to make it my business to go find a community of people that are followers and get involved in this thing. So next thing I know, I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay. So what was first of all, when you entered the ashram, what was the understanding? What was the commitment at that time?
The commitment at that time was, you move into this ashram. It sounds strange, but you got a bunch of 20-year-old kids basically, and the idea was you move in. This is a lifetime gig. It's a lifetime commitment, and that was, and for me, that was there. The motivation also was, I want to work full time in the organization that is sponsoring this guru's activities, and I'd like to get to know him more. And I want to be part of this movement. The movement was, can we bring peace to the world one person at a time? If people find inner peace, they'll live a more peaceful life. I experienced it. I thought, well, the medicine's working for me. Maybe it'll work for other people. So let me get on this bandwagon and ride this thing. That's what I did.
Okay. What I really appreciated about reading the chapter in the book about this chapter of your life, and really, I mean, 10 years is a significant a portion of your life. What I really appreciated about it, among other things, is you described it as a cult, and you made some mention of some of the dysfunction perhaps that you discovered, or maybe a little bit of disillusionment that you discovered along the way. Yet you also acknowledge the positives that came from it and that you take with you. You talk about how it affected you really, like, profoundly throughout, for the duration of your adult life, this experience. But it was such an interesting and complex mix of, I would say, positive and negative.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just maybe highlights of the most positive and most negative aspects of the experience? And do you still think of it as a cult? What the organization that you joined?
Yeah, those are great questions to ponder. So, when I was in it, I didn't think it was a cult. I thought everything else was a cult.
Right.
The Hare Krishnas, the Moonies, whoever, Scientology,
the men in the business suits,
the children of God, the men in the business, whatever. But no, I'm not in a cult. I'm not in a cult because what we're doing is the right path. We're the chosen ones. We're the lucky ones. We're the fortunate ones. So that mentality is where if there's a negative to my experience, it would be being very narrow-minded during those years.
Now, but do you feel you were brainwashed, so to speak? Was that like, did that dogma come at you from?
There was a lot of dogma, in my opinion now. Yeah. There was a lot of dogma. And it didn't have to be that way. But when you have a 16-year-old kid who was brought up from the time he was 4 or 5 to be the messenger by his family, by his father, to carry on this work and to take it to the world and to be treated like royalty from that age. I mean, just imagine the psychology for a minute. And so those people that were around him that were elders at the time, after his father died when he was 8 years old, I think, he became the master, the perfect master, so to speak. And the elders around him were certainly supportive of, in that part of India where he lived, in northern India.
I lost your sound there, Don. You muted yourself, I think. You're still on mute. It's still showing on my end as muted.
There we go.
There you go. Great.
Okay. So his in that northern part of India, there was an element of the Hindu religion that was called bhakti yoga, which was a devotion to a personal deity. And a lot of that was exported to the West when young Maharaji came to the West in 71 and 72. So that came with him, and it was encouraged. And during the course of my time when I was in the ashram, when I left the ashram in 1984, he was starting to tear that apart and get rid of it because it was unhelpful. And I think he was maturing. He was now, 29, 30 years old or whatever.
Oh, fully mature.
Yeah, he was maturing. Something was happening for him too. So now he's known as a global peace ambassador. So the way that he's viewing himself and the way that he's viewed in the world is a lot different from those early days.
Do you think that's a healthier all-around thing?
Yeah. I think it's a little more realistic. So that's the negative, was the absorbing that kind of dogma. And
was there anything diabolical though that you experienced? Would you?
No, not at all. There was a lot of love flowing everywhere. I mean, this was a love fest. It really was.
Platonic love, just to be clear, right?
Yeah. There was tons of camaraderie and brotherly, sisterly love, and it was just a very there was a lot of blissed out people, me included, in there. So the positive was developing a strong internal practice and understanding how to manage the monkey mind, the talkative self, the ego. I mean, to live monastically for 10 years, there's a lot you give up, and you've got to find some inner strength. You've got to find inner purpose. You've got to believe in a mission. There's things that need to sustain you because you have so little. You don't have money. You don't have possessions. You don't have your privacy. You don't have things like that. But what you do have is you have a rich inner practice. So I've carried that on with me, and that's been the gift. The inner practice has been an amazing, amazing, wonderful gift to me. I write about it. The experience of, for me, the experience of meditation has been a powerful, powerful thing. And it's only gotten stronger over the years.
Nice. So you weren't so disillusioned that you threw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. You kept the practice and
Yeah.
And continue to benefit from it. You weren't soured on it. You weren't
No.
and you write beautifully about meditation. I have very erratically practiced it myself, and I've noticed that when I do practice consistently, there are myriad benefits. Yet it is very difficult for me to be consistent with practicing. It's interesting. There are certain practices I have, like journaling, hiking, that the benefits are just so crazy obvious, and there's like no effort to sustain them. And of course, the more you practice anything, you strengthen that muscle. But with meditation, it's been difficult for me personally to incorporate consistently. So how would you speak to that? Do you have any tips or suggestions in regard to that?
In one of the articles, as I recall, I talked about what are some of the fundamentals that have sustained me over the years. One of them was, if you're thirsty, no matter what, you will seek water if you're really, really thirsty. And that applies to meditation. And I found when I'm thirsty, I'll meditate. And the way to continue the thirst is, because you can't remember the experience of meditation, because it's not a mental memory. It's an experience, just like eating ice cream or having a cold beer or whatever. There's, in that moment, you have an experience. And the same thing, when you tune yourself inside to the inner life force and you have that connection to it, you're in the present moment. There's no real thought. There's just an experience of you connecting to this very subtle but very obvious energy. And that energy radiates love and warmth and kindness and light, and you rub up against it. So you absorb that stuff. And yet it's not a mental practice. So you can't go through the day and just think mentally. It just doesn't work that way for me. Maybe it does for some people, but for me, the thirst is, I want more of that because it's so good. It's like, Eric, if you go to your favorite restaurant, you have a meal and you just every time you go there, you get, it's consistent food. You're like, oh man, I just want to go back there, because that there's something there that when you start munching it down, you just know, I'm back home. It feels so good. That's what the experience of meditation is like. Once you develop the muscle, and look, it takes practice, and you don't always have that experience. It's not always like easy, but over time, at least my experience has been, it does get a bit easier, provided you're not cluttering up your life with a bunch of nonsense and distractions and so forth.
Really interesting distinction that I'm picking up on when I hear you just make that, especially that analogy to a meal at a restaurant that you love, and that how you just very naturally want to go back. Because I think that there are a lot of things out there that people know are good for them: exercise, meditation, eating healthy foods. There's we know what's good for us pretty much at this point, many of us. And yet, often we still have trouble getting ourselves to do the things that we even know from experience. We've had the delicious meal, and yet, it can still, I find it interesting because I have things like that. For me, hiking is a complete no-brainer, because, because pretty much every single time I go on a hike, I feel better afterwards. And I mean, really better. So, when I'm in a mood where I'm exhausted, I don't, I just want to do nothing, or I want to just I remember many nights coming home from work, especially. So, I mean, but what I would do is I would fall back on those points of reference. Something in me would click in and go, oh, you know what? you know this, not, you know, this is good for you. Every time you do this, you feel better. Even when you're tired, when you start, you feel invigorated after. And there's something about those accumulating those reference experiences that enables you to push through when you don't feel like it.
Yeah, I think the same thing would apply to meditation too. You know, like, yeah, it's not a mental memory, but it's there's something in you. There's some kind of memory in there that knows, like, and maybe it's just because you experience the antithesis of that, which is, I don't know about you, but there's times when our minds can just drive us nuts. Too much thinking, too much worrying, too much processing, whatever, and it's just like, man, don't you just want to like get out of that and just, wouldn't it be nice to go to a place where you just don't have to deal with all that? And that's the oasis of the experience of the inner truth, the inner peace. And then you start heading towards that. You go, yeah, this is a good thing. It's a developing the habit, developing a good habit.
Right. Yeah. So you lived in the ashram, and then of course you joined the organization, as you had said. You had set out to do that, and you did exactly that, right? You ended up traveling the world. You ended up teaching meditation, developing very practical real world skills in terms of public speaking, delivering workshops, working. I mean, you were a business person. You were working for a nonprofit, but you had a job. So tell us how this came to an abrupt stop some 10 years in.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said, check, all true. The abrupt stop. The abrupt stop was Maharaji, whose Indian name is Prem Rawat. So at around 1984, he decided that he wanted to close the ashrams. He wanted to shut that institution, which it became a kind of an institution. He knew it was a cult. I mean, there's no question in my mind. He knew. He encouraged it for many years. And I think he got to a point where his thinking must have been, I just don't need it anymore. It's not necessary. The ashram created a base of labor, of people that were willing to work really hard to accomplish a lot of things. Hundreds and hundreds of people around the world doing that. And I think, there was probably many layers to that decision. But if I take one point of view, it would be that it had served its purpose. Oh, so I was the president of the corporation at that time. And we laid off in the US maybe 75 to 100 people who were on the payroll. And myself and my assistant, who then became my wife subsequent to that, we were some of the last two on the payroll. And then we shut it down, and it sort of transformed itself. It stayed alive, but it shrunk. And, most of us went on to then start a new life.
Fascinating. So kind of the decision was made for you. Do you think Correct. You would have continued on, and for how much longer do you imagine? I mean, this is hard to say.
I probably would have continued on. I don't know for how long, but I would have continued for sure.
Before the Maharaj, is that the correct term?
Let's call him Prem Rawat. It's just easier to say.
Yeah, Prem Rawat. So when Prem Rawat decided to completely do an overhaul of the whole organization, this is a very interesting thing. This is a story I haven't really, I think, heard before, because my first question is, how much money was being given up? Like how much revenue was coming in? Because when he made this decision, it sounds like he did so from a thoughtful place. And it sounds like it was a sound decision in terms of improving things, right, within the organization. He sounds like he didn't want it to be a cult. He genuinely wanted to pursue this mission, and as opposed to maybe the lifestyle or the material, So I'm curious as to, since you were president, maybe you had some knowledge of this. How much money was he sort of giving up by shutting this thing down, shutting down the ashrams? You don't have to give me a number, but I mean, like, was that a big factor?
I would look at it a little differently. Just my opinion. And, I was not as close. I mean, I was certainly privy to some, inside workings, but certainly not at all. I think it was a beneficial financial situation to not have the ashrams as overhead.
Okay.
I think the ashrams were becoming a financial drain, basically. And so it was one of many moving parts, I think, that needed to get, cleaned up. So I think the closure of the ashrams was a
business decision.
Was a step towards a different business model, basically. Yeah.
Do you think his intentions were pure?
Pure in...
Like, do you think his intention was he wanted to do good and he wanted to continue doing good and it made sense for the organization to change for that purpose? Or was it more gray than that?
I can't speak for his thinking at that, point in time. I can only surmise that it was a prudent move to if his so it's complicated.
The reason I ask, though, is because when I think of a cult, I think of diabolical intentions. I think of like and I'm not getting the sense of that from this story.
No, not my personal opinion, experience. No, nothing diabolical. Look, the point of it is that Prem Rawat never charged money for these techniques of meditation. His father made it really clear when he was doing it. He passed that on to Prem Rawat. There was never, nobody was ever charged a dime to learn how to meditate. What people did, because of their experience, myself included, and tens of thousands of people wanted to give him whatever they had. And I know people that gave up their entire trust funds. I mean, talking millions and millions and millions of dollars, were freely given to him. So Prem Rawat is a very wealthy man. Let's not mince words here. We gave him everything that we possibly could back then. And that's only grown it's only his net worth has only grown. There's just the way that this thing has gone, because, he moved from having lots of human beings traveling around the world teaching meditation like I did to using technology to teach the techniques. So instead of having hundreds of people doing it, there's him. And now he shot videos and things like that. You can read his book. You can go online. You can take sort of courses like master classes. And then basically at the end of it, you can sign up and learn the specific techniques, the same techniques that I was taught, 50 years ago, the same techniques that were taught hundreds of years ago. Nothing new about them.
Right. So, yeah. So you found yourself out of a job somewhat abruptly. And from reading your book, I know that it was not an easy transition, both practically speaking and psychologically speaking. So, there are a lot of directions we can go with this in terms of, I know that your parents, individually felt very different about this path that you pursued. So I'm not going to go there right now, but I am interested in hearing how disorienting was it when you were out of a gig and you had to figure out what to do next? And then I'm going to, ask that in the context of this idea of the person that you want to be and figuring that out.
Yeah. So what one day I was the president of this corporation, and the next day, and it's pretty close to the next day, it might've been a week later, but the idea was, the next day I was selling telephone systems in South Miami, knocking on doors of businesses trying to make a living. And yeah, it was a rude awakening, and it wasn't easy, and it was stressful because basically it was, now I'm back in the real world, and I just got bills to pay. So let me find some work to do, whatever it was. I had to find my way, and I had no clue, Eric. I had no clue what to do. I remember taking some personality tests at the time, and all that they could come up with during it was, what's your preferred interest? What do you really want to do? You know what it was? It wasn't specific. It was adventure. Well, that wasn't real helpful for me.
It's a value, right? It's a value.
It's a value, right? So I didn't really know the person that I wanted to be. Everything was moving too fast. It was like I was down at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
So
Survival.
It was survival, et cetera. And that continued for a bunch of years. And but I did know that I could tap into some of the skills that I'd learned. So your earlier point was I learned about public speaking, and I managed a team of people when I was in the organization, and gradually those led me into sales training, which gradually led me into another job in consulting, and I was always comfortable in front of the room. I'm an extrovert, and like the other day I was playing golf, and some folks stopped passing a trail as we're myself and another guy were playing, and they were walking by, and they said, excuse us. I said, no, it's fine. And they said, well, do you mind if we just wait here and watch you hit your shots? I said, no, it's fine. Go ahead. So the other guy hit, and then I hit, and luckily, I hit a great ball. I mean, a really great shot for me. And I just threw my arms up in the air, and I just said, I was screaming. I was like, yes, and then they were clapping. And I said, you know what? I love an audience. And they just laughed their heads off. It was great. So, I wound up in jobs that suited those kinds of skills. So I went into sales. I went into consulting. I started teaching workshops. I was having a blast. I was learning. I was growing. I was working with good people. And, I kind of found a home that way. And that served me well. I was thirsty to learn. I knew I was way behind the eight ball. I mean, I was way behind the curve. At 33, I'm starting out where most people were at 23. So I felt like I was playing catch up all the time. And, I felt like, gosh, I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room here. And I'm trying to find my way, scrabbling along to try to make up for lost time, Eric.
What's interesting, you have a chapter in the book all about transitions. And I really thought that was very thought-provoking and interesting, that there are predictable phases of transitions that you describe in the book. William Bridges is the author that you cite. Yeah. And so what's interesting to me about this transition it's pretty like marked transition, from one week to the next, as it were. But one of the common, your first wife, you mentioned that you and she had been about the last 2 employees or so on the payroll. So it was not a complete break, like from everything that came before. At the very least, you had someone who had been through this experience with you, and you were embarking upon, like, what do we do next together, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was very much that way. I mean, I think both of us were kind of stood there and looked at each other like, okay, what next now? What do we do now? And we were, and I'd known her since she was 18. Now I'm in my 30s, she's in her late 20s. And, we were good friends, and I had great admiration for her, her talents and skills and what she was able to do. And, and clearly in my mind, I remember when I first saw her get up and speak in front of a group of people, she was just a little angel, lit up like, and I said to myself, you know what, if I were to have children, boy, she would make a great mother of my children. I distinctly remember saying that to myself. And of course, it turned out to be true. And she was a great mother, still is a great mother. And, we set off in life to say, we've got to find our way now. And we did the best that we could.
And interestingly, I mean, maybe very understandably, you chose a much more conventional path at this point. You needed grounding and stability. But you also decided to get married and start a family, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And
was correct.
That, when you had signed up initially, you had taken a vow of celibacy, as I understand, as part of joining the ashram. And you, as far as you knew at the time, when you were very young, you were signing up for this kind of way of life for life. So I'm guessing then I'm understanding that it was never your intention to someday have a family, up until it was. Is that right?
As strange as that sounds, you are correct.
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't actually entirely sound strange. It's very understandable.
No, it's true. I had no intention when I was, traveling the world, teaching meditation. I thought this is my calling. This is what I'll be doing. That's what I'm going to do.
One of my favorite song lyrics of all time and quotes of all time is John Lennon saying, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans.
Boy, isn't that the truth? And so it was a bit of a surprise when I went from, the way I like to think of it now is I went from one ashram to a different type of ashram, which was we're going to build a shelter for a family. And the ashram has slightly different rules and regulations, but honestly, they're not that different when you really boil it down to. So.
Yeah. And, like I would imagine anyone embarking on parenthood, you have to consider your own upbringing, and you imagine, what are the things that I want to keep from the way I was raised, and what are the things that I want to be sure to, do differently. Do you remember having entertaining specific thoughts about that as you became a dad, at least initially?
Oh, yeah. Oh, clearly. Yeah. And absolutely. The overriding theme for me was, how can I not be the over-controlling, authoritarian, I know more than you should do what I tell you to do, dad. And, that was a lot of what I got coming from a ex-military, guy, my dad, who, had that kind of, that was the way he was raised. So I got raised that way. And I said to myself, when eventually I did have a son, it was for me, it felt easier having a daughter for some reason. Like, I don't remember having as much of that thinking, but it was clear to me when my wife was pregnant with our second child, which we didn't know what he would be until he was born. And that was a big turning point for me. And that's when the resolution was very firmly made in my mind, which was, I am not going to raise him the way that I was raised, if I possibly can. How can I filter out some of that stuff and not lay it on him, because I just didn't want to do that.
This is rich territory, so I'm just
keep going, man.
Yeah, I mean, like,
wherever you want to go, man. I'm so happy to go there with you.
How interesting that having a son was provoked very different impulses in you than having a daughter. And my mind immediately goes, maybe simplistically, to the fact that the way that your mom was for you throughout your childhood, I think the way you describe it is something you very much wanted to replicate. And certainly your conflicts with your dad, and you have a whole chapter in the book that, by the way, was I keep citing different chapters as being especially powerful, and it's a testament to just like how rich this book is. But the chapter about your dad, and specifically about making peace with him, wow, it's so Powerful, so
Mm,
powerful. So, what do you think? I'm just throwing this out to you. I don't know, but
yeah.
what do you think of the fact that maybe having a daughter might have been less threatening because you imagined sort of the way your mom's nurturance, and having a son made you face more directly, what you experienced from your dad as growing up, and your desire to not repeat those things. And then I want to also ask you, as you start thinking about,
Yeah.
this is a loaded question, but how successful were you at not repeating the things that you really wanted to not repeat?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could ask my son about that, but I'll give you. And he's read the articles that you're referring to, and I
Mm,
I kind of checked these with him to
mm,
say, have I got this pretty right? And he said, yeah, you do.
mm,
Um, so I feel pretty confident in what I'm about to say, which
mm,
is I think for the most part I got it right with both of them. But when we talk about my son, I'll give you some examples of what I mean. And I want to go back to, I'm going to tap into one thing that stuck with me. So Prem Rawat has, I think, 4 children. And when they were growing up, I remember him speaking at one event, and he was talking about his kids, and he said something like, "Don't get on the wrong side of the fence with your kids. Like, stay on their side." Something like
mm,
that. And it stuck with me. And that was with me when my daughter was born, and I remember it then. And then particularly as you're mentioning about my son, it even came to me more strongly. So, for example, I never I never told him to cut his hair ever. I never told him what to wear. I never told him what to do before he left the house. That kind of thing, which I was strictly told various things in my entire life. You know, I was ridiculed by my father for following Prem Rawat in front of my family on a regular basis for a number of years. So humiliation,
mm,
basically. I said, I will never do that to my kid, never. And I believe that's true. And and we stayed on the same side of the fence virtually our entire life. He became the bass player in my band when he was in high school, and we practiced together. He would play my original songs. He would learn them. We played gigs together at bars. We never had a argument, musical argument, or some kind of father son breakdown, kind of a thing like, stop telling me how to do this, or we didn't go there. It just didn't
that's
happen.
rare, just even among
Didn't happen.
bandmates.
And I'm not exaggerating. I'm just saying that he was
Yeah.
a good kid,
Mm,
and he still is a good kid, a good young man. So I look. There was a lot of therapy and a lot of work to kind of get through the father stuff,
mm.
and to kind of approach him the way that I did. And I'm not saying I was perfect. I certainly made mistakes along the way, but he and I have always been friends, and not always agreed. We haven't always agreed on everything, but we've always been friends, and he's always been respectful to me, and I hope I've always been as respectful as I can to him.
I love that phrasing of being on the same side, being on their side, but what's interesting about that is I think probably most parents tell themselves and believe very much that they are on their kids' side. And that's the reason they want to see them, they don't want to see their kids fall down and hurt themselves. They don't want to see their kids make mistakes, even just the natural growing pains of life. Um, there's so many like thoughts in my head right now about this. I'm thinking about a beautiful book called
Mm,
Being Mortal,
mm,
and by Atul Gawande. In the book, the reason I'm mentioning it is that he talks about caring for elderly parents, and he talks about the similarity between the way you care for your children or typically, and the way that you care about for elderly parents. And that similarity is that it's protection and safety at all costs, right? It's an understandable impulse. You want to protect your kid, you want to protect your elderly parent, but it can be a stifling protection if it prevents them from living a full life and doing the things they want to do. And it's a very tricky thing to balancing act, right? Because you do want to protect them, you do want to keep them safe, you do want to steer them in a good direction. You don't want them to experience unnecessary pain or suffering if you can help it, which you can't. So this idea of being on their side is really interesting, because don't you think that a lot of parents come from that belief? Like, your dad probably felt he was on your side, even though he may have handled it really terribly, but he, and then I got the sense from reading that chapter, there was a lot of regret on his part when you finally did have, this is, by the way, very powerful. I don't want to give the whole thing away. So, but I was very moved by the process by which you were able to reach out to him. Finally, you basically hardly spoke for 10 years, right? While you were in the ashram, understandably so, if he's ridiculing you every step of the way. But I think that most parents, they really do the best they can, and they come from a good heart, a good intended place. But of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions and all that. So how would you, I'm talking a lot here, but what I'm trying to get at is, how can you be on your kids' side and yet also know that you're, I think you want to instill in them the trust that you do have their best interests at heart. How can you do that, even if you maybe really strongly disagree about choices they're making? How do you navigate that balance between giving them the free rein to live their life, maybe make their own mistakes, while knowing, while still giving them the sense that you're supportive of them, even if you disagree with their choices?
Yeah. Obviously, every family's different. Every kid's different, every human's different in terms of, how we, how things kind of show up, and all I can tell you is this is the way it was for me, and it may not be that way for everybody else, but my mother, Polly is the mother of my kids, and we just tried to create an atmosphere of love, and within that atmosphere of love, yeah, you're right. We wanted, we're trying to protect them and, all that kind of thing. I think that the thing that made a difference for me was not imposing my will on my son in particular, not trying to shape him into my image, because that's where I rebelled. That was the rebellion. The guys standing at the train station, they all looked like my dad, right? And what do you think he wanted me to look like? He wanted me to look like him. So, I mean, it's common sense, like, well, you want that. Well, I want the opposite. So what I tried to do is I tried to not give my kids the reason to push against, So I think some of it was, well, if I don't give them anything to rebel against, then maybe my chances of them acting out might be a little bit better. Just my theory, it panned out that way. I mean, I thought, gosh, maybe life will be a big payback, and for all my rebellion, I will get two kids that will just go off their effing rockers. And I was like, they didn't.
Yeah.
Well, and then I'm thinking about it. Well, we didn't, and they'll laugh at me too. And, yes, to this day, they will say I'm a bit of a control freak on, things around the household and, things like that. And I get, it's still like when you talk about, you inherit these things in your DNA from your family of origins, like, man, I'd love to get some of that out of there, but boy, I've tried hard, but some of it's still in there. It's just deep in the DNA. But back to your question on the kids, man, Eric, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what to say except that we worked really hard to create an atmosphere of mutual respect, of the kids realizing that just because somebody is an adult doesn't mean you can't ask them for help, or that you might they're smarter than you. I mean, or the kids were homeschooled, but they went to a school with other kids that were homeschooled at all different ages. So they interacted with kids their whole life, with adults and children, older and younger. They somehow got this sense of community and of like mutual respect. And maybe that's part of it too. I don't know, but I suspect it had a role to play in it.
In the book, you talk about you now are married. You're married again. This is your third wife, and you talk very openly and honestly about the breakdowns of your previous marriages. I think you honestly, from my perspective, Don, you do people a real service in your book. I know I'm really like stroking your ego, but I know that your ego, you work at managing it, so I'm not too worried about you in that regard. But I mean, seriously, I mean, the openness with which you talk about your own kind of missteps and kind of flaws, if you will, along the way. Just it humanizes you, and it makes all of your insights and wisdom that you sprinkle very generously throughout each chapter that much more credible, because you've lived this stuff. And what I also love about the articles individually and the book as a whole is you get a sense of someone who is on a journey. This is not, you never arrive. There's always growth to be had. And oftentimes it's painful, or it's initiated by painful circumstances, but there's so much richness to be had in the book. So I hope for not just for your sake, but for everyone's sake, that it finds a really wide audience. I think that there's just so many gems in it. And I really appreciate everything that you're sharing with me today, as well as what you share in the book. Do you have any other thoughts about through the different stages of your life, your 30-year career that you've talked about a little bit, and that you just certainly make good mention of in the book? You have finally arrived now at this marriage, and you speak very openly, even just about like the little like, you're not, my wife and I aren't perfect. Yes, we both meditate. We're both spiritual practitioners, and we're human. So of course we rub up against each other, but you talk about very practical techniques that you use to diffuse arguments and to keep each other grounded. It's so beautiful to read about it. So I guess I'm just asking, do you have any thoughts about how you have grown into the person that you want to be over the years, how that may have changed through specific inflection points? This is a wide open question, by the way. And then finally, where you are now at this stage of your life, as you think about the person you want to be now, 70 years in.
Yeah. Growing into the person that I wanted to be, to answer that piece first, perhaps, that piece started to come to me when I realized in my second marriage that when I started to realize that there was something about it that wasn't working for me, and I had to face that, which was a bit of a surprise to me, meaning I didn't really see that coming, so to speak. But when, and I write about it in the book, but I guess the shorter story of it was when I realized that I was in something that I didn't really want to be in, and I had to face the fact that I had no idea what was on the other side. If I let this thing go, and I was, how old was I then? This was 2016. So yeah, I was like in my 60s. So I'm in my second marriage. I mean, if people are in their 60s, you're thinking retirement, you're thinking downsizing, you're thinking, let me kind of coast down into the sunset, kind of a thing. Well, I said I need to pull the plug here because there's something that is not serving me. It's not, and it's me. There's something that I need to do different here. And when I did that and realized that, boy, there was lots of beliefs. I'm not good enough to have everything I want. I'll settle for second. I'll settle for good enough, not great. These kinds of tapes were running. And when I dealt with those, that's when I became the person I wanted to be.
Mm.
And that opened up the doors to everything that we're doing right here today. Those moments, those poignant moments when I had to, like I'm on the trapeze, I'm swinging on the trapeze, I'm holding on for dear life. And I know that there's another trapeze over there that I need to grab, but I've got to let go of this trapeze I'm on. And that's super scary. And I was scared to death for a long time. And then I got some, serendipitous things happened. And I was able to like say, wait a second, I'm going to let go. I got to grab this other trapeze. And when I grabbed that other trapeze, I had no idea where it was going. None. I just knew that I've got to be deeply truthful to myself and honest with the fact that I know I need something different. I don't know what it is. I'm going to put it out there to the universe and just, that's all I know. And, the universe answered more quickly than I could have imagined. And Mary Claire showed up, who's my third wife. And that began the chapter that we're in right now, which is, just discovering that the things that I thought were super important, like I need so much of this or that, of whatever it was in the world. What started to happen was I actually need less than I ever thought. And more important than anything else is living a life in the pursuit of peace, trying to be more self-aware, more conscious, more intentional, I'm trying to be kinder to myself and to others. Those things that I think I was working on over the years started to just kind of take it to another level. And within all that, realizing I still have so much more to go on that. But that that's brings me, here, and that's what I try to do every day. I try to just notice, am I showing up the right way? Am I showing up with kindness and compassion? Am I practicing what I write about? And honestly, sometimes my wife just tells me, she said, "You're not, go read your articles that you're writing."
Right.
And I laugh and I say, "I wrote them, and I said, I wrote the damn things, and she said, "Well, then you better start practicing them, and we laugh and I go, "You're right." And then I just, I step back and I go, you know what? This is if this isn't about life, I don't know what is, where, the learning just doesn't stop. And the journey towards, kind of catching yourself sooner. It's just one of the things I think is a sign of growth is you catch yourself sooner when you go off track. You apologize a little bit quicker and with a little more sincerity when you screw up. And that's how, to me, one of my interpretations of, am I making some nice progress here? Well, I don't really know, but if I can catch myself sooner,
It feels like it. Yeah.
I think that's helpful.
Progress, not perfection. Oh, there were so many beautiful moments of that response of yours that um, that I wanted to follow up on. Number one, read your own articles, your wife says to you. I think that, there's this wonderful expression that we teach what we need to learn. And I think that one of the beautiful things about writing is, writers that are, typically writers that are trying to arrive at some kind of truth are wrestling with the things that they're in their own lives that they're struggling with. And so it makes sense that people write about the things that are important to them and that reflect their own struggles and continuing struggles. And I think that, you talk about humility as one of your core values. And I love that because, the moment we think we've got something down, that's when life tests us and often, puts us in our place, and we realize, oh, I thought I worked through this. I thought I mastered this. And then you realize that there's levels and that there's progression. And, it can be frustrating when you feel like you're backsliding, but it keeps you humble, and it keeps you, it reminds you that there's always room for growth. So that's one thing that I took from, that comment about, that your wife makes to you. The metaphor of the trapeze, I thought was a very powerful one, great visual. And I think so many of us grip that trapeze that we're on so tightly, and for so many swings back and forth before we're ready to make that leap. Some people never do make that leap, perhaps, it's we're terrified of the unknown, and of letting go, and of failing, and, making a mess, and ruining ourselves and ruining our lives. And so we cling more tightly to that which is not working. So your point about facing the music and, dealing, like, it's one thing to have this isn't really working so well for me. Just even that is a step of self-awareness, because a lot of people, they're just on the treadmill. Doesn't even really dawn on them in a clear way. But then once it does, it can still take years sometimes to do something about it. Fear is powerful stuff. I love the image of finally taking the leap of faith and not knowing, what the next trapeze is going to lead to, but somehow mustering the courage. And again, there's that heart again, because courage essentially means from the heart. And that on the other side of our fear often is something beautiful and something we never could have imagined or predicted for ourselves, like your current marriage. You leaving the sort of known and not even expecting to find necessarily someone else, and certainly not as quickly as you did. And this whole life you're living now wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't, taken that leap. So that's kind of profound to think about. So you also talk about and we're going to wrap this up soon, even though we could go on for hours. What I'm curious about is, you talk about techniques that you use in your own life to help keep yourself on track. And, you mentioned this one thought that you talk about, sort of like replacing unhelpful thoughts with thoughts that serve you and that are more empowering. And one of the ones you used in your book is, the universe has my back. Now, coming from the place of someone who has admittedly a lot of difficulty trusting the universe, I know the universe is a wonderful provider, and I'm grateful for the many, many blessings and gifts it has given me. And yet, still, I have trouble trusting it and having that kind of faith. And I do wonder, like, when I hear that statement, the universe has my back, speak to that. Is it and speak to that in terms of the where that, I understand how it's a helpful belief, but I don't know, where did you arrive at that, and what purpose does it serve in your life? And do you question it, or do you struggle with it, or is it just a reminder for you?
The way I look at that, how do I look at that? One way I look at it is, I feel blessed to be alive and fortunate, And I know that it could be snapped from me at any moment. I'm not in control of that. I make my effort towards what I want, my intentions. And I know the results are not up to me. So I practiced letting go. But I'm clear on, over the last 10 years, I'd say I've probably gotten clearer on my intentions and the belief that my role in this giant play, this giant game that we're in, is to live my life with love and to seek a path of peace, to make the effort, towards that, knowing that I may or may not receive what I might, what I like. So there's that part of effort and letting go for me. And there's the other part where maybe it's just through different experiences where, maybe, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I did holotropic breath work, and I don't know if you're familiar with it. And I don't know if our listeners are familiar with Stan Grof's work. It's a sidebar kind of a thing, deeper dive on that. But I've had some experiences where I've tapped into a beautiful place within me that has pretty much reassured me that the universe has my back, that I don't need to struggle. I don't need to in my life anymore. I have struggled a lot. I have struggled a lot. And I'm not talking financially, just, it's that it's going through all kinds of stuff. But there's something about maybe it's just getting older and realize, I don't know what happens, psychologically and all the things that are, you can read about and study. But there's something in there about I'm going to do my best, and I'm just going to lay it all on the line, and whatever happens is going to happen. But I'm going to give it everything I've got, and the chips are going to fall where they may. Like the book's a good example. Meaning, the woman that's my publishing consultant she said, "What do you want to get out of this book?" Some people want to generate sales for their business, or they want to get more coaching clients, or they want this or they want that. They want to make a lot of money or whatever it might be. I said, I don't want any of that. I said, I want, one, it's a challenge. I want to see if I can do it. Two, I'm going to give it everything I have, and knowing that I left it all out there on the floor, and whatever happens is going to happen. I know that. I know I put my best into it, and so that's part of, for me, the universe has my back, which is I'm gonna do my best, and that's it.
I love that. Don Johnson, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your not yet published manuscript with me. I really loved it, and I would recommend it to anybody out there that is interested in living well and achieving more peace in their life. I think that really is what it boils down to. What things create more peace versus what things create less peace. And you approach that from a lot of different angles, and you share a lot of personal stories that back up what you're talking about. And it's just been such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit. And I think that it really does all boil down to peace. And what I love about your answer there is that if you know that you've done your best and you've put your heart into your life and your work, the rest really isn't up to you. And maybe it's not even so important in the scheme of things, because peace lies within knowing that you've done your part. You've done what, in a world where we have so little control over things, you've taken control and responsibility, to use one of your 4 values, over that which is within your control, and you've given it your best, and you've done it with heart. And what more can a person do in their life?
Yeah, that's well said, Eric.
Thank you, Don, and look forward to hopefully speaking with you again soon. Take good care.
Thank you, Eric.